Every generation creates a handful of Pokémon that rise above the rest. Some dominate for a while, standing at the top until the next generation arrives to take away their crown. Others leave a deeper mark, their influence stretching far beyond the era in which they were conceived. But only once in a lifetime do we witness a Pokémon as catastrophic as Calyrex-Shadow. Calyrex-Shadow is a special form of Calyrex that is obtained upon fusing with Spectrier. Immediately upon release, this Pokémon has been dominant in the realm of competitive Pokémon to a degree that was previously unheard of. Oftentimes, whenever the topic of the strongest Pokémon crops up, you'll hear stories about how Incineroar dominates VGC with an iron fist, how Mega Rayquaza's power was so unhinged that it necessitated the creation of an entirely new format, or how Mewtwo utterly destroyed everything in its debut generation. I am here to tell you that not a single one of them compared to the horrors of this Pokémon. So please join me as I take you through the story of Calyrex-Shadow and how it came to shatter the boundaries of competitive Pokémon. To understand how ridiculously strong Calyrex-Shadow is, we must first understand the world of competitive Pokémon. The game of Pokémon can be played in two modes. The first, Smogon Singles, requires trainers to build a team of 6 Pokémon and duke it out in a single battle, sending in one Pokémon at a time until one side has lost all 6 of their Pokémon. This is similar to what is seen in the anime, though with a few more rules and regulations. The second mode is the officially supported VGC format, in which double battles are the name of the game. Here, players are also required to build teams of 6 Pokémon, but now 2 Pokémon are simultaneously sent out on each side, with trainers only being allowed to bring 4 out of 6 Pokémon into battle, leaving 2 behind. In both formats, a special place is reserved for those Pokémon deemed too powerful for ordinary competition. In singles, all Pokémon are inherently divided into tiers, the standard tier being OU, home to icons of the game like Landorus Therian, Heatran, Tyranitar, and Zapdos. Pokémon that surpass the power levels of OU are banished to a place known as Ubers, where only the strongest Pokémon are allowed to roam, including the box art legendaries like Ho-Oh, Giratina, and Lunala. In VGC, these Pokémon are locked behind restricted formats that allow the use of 1 or 2 restricted legendaries in any given team for a selected period of time. The Ubers tier and the restricted VGC formats represent the absolute summit of competitive Pokémon. These are the domains of the fabled legendaries, like Mewtwo, whose dominance was so mind-altering in the first generation of Pokémon that it inspires video essays to this day. Or Kyogre, who summoned endless rains, washing away entire teams beneath its impossibly powerful water spout. And Groudon, who reshaped the world of competitive with its ruthless brand of firepower, especially when channeling its primordial form. These were not just Pokémon, they were the kings of their age. But history has never been kind to kings. Every generation demands something greater than the last. What was once considered extraordinary slowly becomes ordinary, replaced by something faster, stronger, or more oppressive. Competitive Pokémon enjoyers are all too familiar with this concept and refer to it as power creep, an unforgiving phenomenon that has rendered many a Pokémon obsolete throughout the generations. Landorus Therian, once revered as the face of competitive Pokémon, has since been usurped by the likes of Incineroar and Great Tusk. The once formidable Tyranitar, Scizor, Mega Kangaskhan, and Cresselia, among many other Pokémon, have suffered a similar fate. Power creep is in fact a force so unrelenting that not even the legends can escape its grasp. And before long, the first major wave of legendary power creep would arrive with the release of Pokémon X and its cover legendary Xerneas. Xerneas was unlike anything players had ever seen. It was blessed with the newly discovered fairy typing, which is still regarded by many as the single best type in the game. It also had an outstanding ability and a truly insane signature move in Geomancy, which could transform Xerneas into an unstoppable sweeper within a single turn. Overnight, both Ubers and VGC players alike began focusing all their efforts into stopping the deer in its tracks, lest they get overwhelmed in the blink of an eye. But Xerneas was only half the story. The 6th generation of Pokémon also ushered in a new era of power creep with the introduction of Mega Evolution, a mechanic that allowed certain fully evolved Pokémon to transcend their natural limits by holding a Mega Stone. The likes of Mega Gengar, Mega Salamence, and Mega Kangaskhan all came to redefine power levels. And ultimately, it all culminated in the arrival of Pokémon's most heinous creation to date. Mega Rayquaza was released in Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire as the origin of Mega Evolution itself according to the game's lore. And given this unique position, it did what no other Mega could. Rayquaza achieved its Mega Evolution without the need of a Mega Stone. Instead, it simply channeled its form change through the move Dragon Ascent, and was therefore at complete liberty to boost its already catastrophic power with items such as the Life Orb and Choice Band. The result was unprecedented. For the first time in competitive history, Smogon's tried and true tiering system failed. Mega Rayquaza was too formidable even for the tier designed to contain the most formidable Pokémon, which forced Smogon to create an entirely new format above Uber's Anything Goes. Mega Rayquaza's dominion was just as absolute in VGC, where it immediately won the World Championships under the skillful hands of Wolf Glick. It seemed impossible that anything could ever surpass this beast. And yet, Pokémon showed no signs of slowing down in their effort to one-up themselves. For a mere 2 generations later, they would strike again. Zacian was released as the cover legendary of Pokémon Sword. A fairy in its natural state, just like Xerneas, Zacian could upgrade itself with the Steel type in its crowned form, adopting what is arguably the best type combination in the game. On top of that, it had some of the most mind-boggling stats anyone had ever seen, with an absolutely busted ability on top. Every pre-existing Pokémon was left in the dust, including Mega Rayquaza, whose typing was far worse, whose ability was far less oppressive, and whose stat distribution was suboptimal in comparison. Before long, both forms of Zacian were forced to follow in Mega Rayquaza's footsteps, becoming the 2nd and 3rd Pokémon to be banished from the Uber's tier. In VGC, however, there is no such mercy as a ban, and there Zacian redefined what it meant to dominate a format, posting usage stats that were far superior to any restricted Pokémon in history. With every passing generation, Pokémon's tolerance for power and dominion rose higher and higher. Each new edition surpassed the last. Each new legendary convinced players they had finally witnessed the strongest Pokémon history would ever produce. And every single time, they were wrong. For beyond every horizon lies another, and waiting just beyond this one was the true pinnacle of power creep. The year was 2020. The Crown Tundra DLC had just been released, marking the final expansion of Pokémon Sword and Shield, the 8th generation of Pokémon. It promised new and returning legendaries, brand new adventures, and enough added content to convince players that perhaps paying half the price of an entire game wasn't such a bad deal after all. The face of the DLC was none other than Calyrex. However, fans were confused. This didn't exactly look like an impressive Pokémon. Despite its grand title as the King of Bountiful Harvests, Calyrex was underwhelming. Its stats were a mediocre mess across the board, its typing was horrendous, the ability was nothing special, and even the design was questionable at best. Calyrex was doomed to become a nothing burger of a Pokémon, forgotten upon release. Or was it? Before long, players had figured out there was more to Calyrex than met the eye. By interacting with the Reigns of Unity, Calyrex could fuse with one of its two loyal steeds, Glastrier and Spectrier, and assume a new form. Fusing with Glastrier transformed Calyrex into Calyrex Ice, a bulky powerhouse of a Pokémon that is one of the greatest threats in VGC to this day. Fusing with Spectrier transformed Calyrex into Calyrex-Shadow. The consequences were astronomical. Calyrex-Shadow was blessed with 165 special attack and 150 speed. To appreciate just how outrageous these numbers are, let's compare them to some other broken Pokémon. But first, here's another outrageous stat. Did you know 98% of my viewers aren't subscribed? Crazy, right? If you've enjoyed this video so far, and you probably have or else you wouldn't have made it this far, consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel. Videos like these take a lot of time and effort, and your support is the best way to keep me going. Alright, back to the video. Xerneas, who once brought both singles and VGC to their knees, only had 131 special attack with a downright average 99 speed. Mega Rayquaza did reach a superior base 180 in its offenses, but its speed was far more reasonable than Calyrex's. Even Zacian-Crowned, one of the speediest Pokémon in recent memory, failed to outrun the horse. There simply wasn't a precedent for a Pokémon that combined this much speed and firepower without any major drawbacks in its other stats. The Pokémon that came closest was Deoxys Attack, whose defenses were awful unlike those of Calyrex's. Beyond its impressive stats, Calyrex-Shadow also gained access to Astral Barrage, a perfectly accurate Ghost-type move with 120 base power that was also a spread move, meaning that it hit both opponents in a double battle. This was absurd. The primal forms of Kyogre and Groudon had been some of the most dominant competitive Pokémon in the generation prior to Calyrex. Largely because of their signature moves Origin Pulse and Precipice Blades, both extremely powerful spread moves that were balanced out by only being 85% accurate. Astral Barrage utterly outclassed both of them as a fully accurate move, which made it almost trivial for Calyrex to score knockout after knockout. To make matters even worse, it only took one such knockout for Calyrex to run away with the game. Its ability as one combined base Calyrex's Unnerve with Spectrier's Grim Neigh. So not only were berries prevented from activating a significant interaction that invalidated resist berries as a form of counterplay, every knockout also gave a boost to Calyrex's special attack, making its next move hit even harder. So if Calyrex managed to score a single knockout, more often than not the match was sealed. And given its tremendous firepower, this wasn't exactly a tall order, especially when you consider the rest of its move pool with options like Nasty Plot, which doubled its special attack, Psyshock, which prevented walls like Blissey from hiding behind their high special defense, and Draining Kiss or Pollen Puff, both of which could punish the dark types that would otherwise switch into Calyrex's Ghost and Psychic moves. We also have to address Calyrex's versatility, which it largely owed to its item choice. Players could, for example, opt into Choice Specs and turn Astral Barrage into a nuclear bomb. There's a reason why Specs Shadow Ball is such a feared combo in competitive. The sheer offensive coverage makes it very hard to switch into a never-ending barrage of boosted Ghost-type moves. Many Pokémon have, after all, built their career around spamming this move, so you can only imagine the horror of Specs Astral Barrage, which is 50% stronger than Specs Shadow Ball. Players could also choose to use Life Orb or Focus Sash and sacrifice immediate power for more flexibility and the ability to use Nasty Plot. Nearly nothing could hope to withstand a +2 Calyrex backed by a Life Orb. This in turn led to a sharp increase in Choice Scarf users, some of the only Pokémon that could outspeed Calyrex and limit its progress. And one of these Choice Scarf users was Calyrex itself. Choice Scarf Calyrex could threaten an instant knockout on the opponent's non-Choice Scarf Calyrex, which would also net an immediate boost to its special attack and allow it to spiral out of control. There was, however, one small mercy in singles. Dynamax had been banned long before Calyrex's arrival. denying it access to the most oppressive battle gimmick in the history of competitive Pokémon. The format of VGC was not so fortunate. There, Dynamax remained perfectly legal, and with access to Max Phantasm and Max Mindstorm, plus the incredible defensive benefits offered by the mechanic, Calyrex quickly cemented itself as the most defining restricted Pokémon behind Zacian, winning multiple tournaments including the World Championships in 2022. Calyrex was truly the embodiment of an apex predator. By every conventional measure, it was poised to become the next Mega Rayquaza and Zacian. And yet, it was still missing one of their achievements. The very accolade that had legitimized their claim as the strongest Pokémon in existence. Calyrex was not banned from Ubers. It remained in the tier, powerful enough to terrify it into submission, yes, but not oppressive enough for it to be banished. But why? What did Calyrex lack in comparison to Rayquaza and Zacian? Well, despite its many overwhelming qualities, Calyrex had one shortcoming that could not be ignored: its mortal weakness to the Dark type. Dark types were resistant to Calyrex's Ghost Stab and immune to its Psychic Stab, while also hitting it with extremely effective damage. But was there a Dark type strong enough to challenge the horse? In the previous generation of Ubers, there were a few Dark types that had been successful due to their ability to check the powerful Necrozma forms. The first one, Arceus Dark, wasn't present in the Sword and Shield Pokédex. The second one, Tyranitar, was a very poor check to Calyrex, as it couldn't handle boosted Grass-type moves. There was, however, one more Pokémon to consider. Yveltal, the mascot legendary of Pokémon Y. A Pokémon that had been terrorizing the prior generation of Ubers with its incredible power, bulk, and versatility. Yveltal had every single quality that was needed to keep Calyrex in check. Its dark typing made it naturally strong into Ghost and Psychic, and its excellent bulk with reliable recovery made it very difficult to overwhelm. Not even a nasty plot-boosted Life Orb Draining Kiss was enough to take it down in one hit. The newly introduced heavy-duty boots also gave Yveltal a complete immunity to Stealth Rock, which was its main weakness in previous generations. It quickly became apparent that Yveltal was the best and only good answer to Calyrex. As a result, Yveltal usage skyrocketed to levels never seen before. It was a mandatory piece on hyper offense, balance, bulky offense, and even dedicated stall teams. No other Pokémon had ever been this omnipresent in Ubers since Snorlax in Gen 2. Even the almighty Primal Groudon, who'd consistently been on nearly every team in Gen 6 and 7, had no place on stall. But wait, if Yveltal was on every team and Calyrex seemingly couldn't do much against it, that would make Calyrex completely useless, right? Well, if that was true, you wouldn't be watching this video. Calyrex was far too dangerous and resourceful to be contained by a single Pokémon. Allow me to introduce you to something I like to call the cat and mouse concept. Competitive Pokémon has always been defined by the art of making adaptations. Something like Heatran is obviously very weak to a ground type like Garchomp. In most cases, Garchomp will simply switch into Heatran and knock it out with Earthquake. But that doesn't mean Heatran is completely helpless. It can put Garchomp on a timer with Toxic, cripple it with a Burn, or in previous generations take a chunk of its health with Hidden Power Ice. Garchomp can then adapt by holding a Lum Berry to counter status conditions or a Yachi Berry to tank Hidden Power Ice. Situations like these can eventually progress into a cat and mouse game, a state of continuous pursuit with the advantage shifting back and forth as time goes on and new strategies are discovered. And nothing exemplified this concept more plainly than Calyrex-Shadow versus Yveltal. Sure, Yveltal could take any raw hit from Calyrex and retaliate with a knockout in a vacuum, but Calyrex had a wide and crafty move pool to its disposal, which it could use to keep Yveltal guessing. Specs and Scarf Calyrex could, for example, trick their choice item onto Yveltal and steal its heavy-duty boots. This would lock Yveltal into a move for the remainder of the battle and cause it to regain its vulnerability to Stealth Rock. Calyrex also liked to use Disable. Most Yveltal had at some point grown comfortable relying on a single Dark-type move in their moveset to check Calyrex. Disable exploited these Yveltal sets by removing their only means of threatening Calyrex and making them utterly helpless. Calyrex also began experimenting with Leech Seed, which was absolutely diabolical. I'll just let the footage speak for itself here. Yveltal adapted in the face of all this tomfoolery by adding Taunt and Snarl into its movesets. Taunt would simply shut down any and all status moves Calyrex might go for, while Snarl could knock Calyrex out through its substitute. In return, Calyrex started using Focus Sash more and more often. With the Sash, it could survive an otherwise fatal attack and overwhelm Yveltal with boosted Draining Kiss. But once again, Yveltal adapted, this time with Sucker Punch, which knocked Calyrex out no matter how low on health the bird was. Sword and Shield Ubers had become a never-ending contest between two rivals that were locked in an endless cycle of innovation, each forcing the other to their limits. Eventually, they were forced into a stalemate, both accepting that neither could ever truly defeat the other. So instead, they spent the generations side by side, completely and utterly dominating the format. Calyrex was, however, the most influential Pokémon in the tier, forcing Yveltal onto every team, significantly boosting the viability of Choice Scarf users and completely outclassing previous titans of the game like Mewtwo and Deoxys. Its stranglehold on the metagame was so vast that it was on the brink of being banned like Rayquaza and Zacian, regardless of all the Yveltal usage. But at the end of the day, Yveltal's presence was just enough to prevent that from happening. However, the Sword and Shield era was coming to a close, and before long, the next games had been announced. Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, a game like no other, featuring time travel, a sick soundtrack, game-breaking bugs, and eventually the reintroduction of most legendary Pokémon in the series, including Calyrex. But guess who didn't make the cut? That's right, Yveltal was no longer in the game. The most important defensive piece in the Calyrex matchup was nowhere to be found in Paldea's Pokédex, and the fragile equilibrium that had defined the previous era shattered without it. But all was not lost yet. The Arceus forms had returned, giving us two solid ghost resistances in Arceus Dark and Arceus Normal. The Paldea region was also home to the Ruinous Quartet, and among them was Ting Lu, a monstrously defensive dark type that could eat Astral Barrage for days. But as Yveltal had proven before, you need far more than a type advantage to restrain Calyrex. Arceus Dark may have had a lot going for it with incredible stats, reliable recovery, and even some of Yveltal's old tricks like Snarl and Taunt. But unlike Yveltal, it could not hold the heavy-duty boots, as it was locked into the Dread Plate. This made it much easier to overwhelm with entry hazards, a weakness that was greatly exacerbated in a format with multiple excellent hazard setters and only one good defog user. It also lacked the crucial Sucker Punch, a move that had been instrumental in Yveltal's approach to dealing with Calyrex. Arceus Normal had the exact same stats and moves, but unlike its Dark-type cousin, it could hold the boots and was immune to Astral Barrage. However, unlike Arceus Dark, it was not immune to Calyrex's secondary stab and therefore susceptible to a boosted Psychic or Psyshock. Ting Lu, though bulkier than both Arceus and Yveltal, had no reliable recovery and was weak to Grass, which made it vulnerable to a boosted Grass Knot. But even though none of these Pokémon were completely safe into Calyrex if they'd been chipped down, they could theoretically contain the horse if they were fully healthy, right? Well, no, not at all. For we haven't even taken into account the most important factor in the Scarlet and Violet era of competitive Pokémon, the brand new battle gimmick that would change everything. Terastallization, or Terra in short, was introduced as the latest battle gimmick in Gen 9, succeeding Mega Evolution in Gen 6, Z-moves in Gen 7, and Dynamax in Gen 8. Terra allowed for all Pokémon to change their typing into any single type they wanted, which would provide them with two distinct benefits. First, they would gain a stab bonus on any move that matched their Terra type. Stab, which stands for Same Type Attack Bonus, is a 50% power boost on all damage-dealing moves that match a Pokémon's type. So, a Fire and Flying type like Charizard would get this boost to all of its Fire and Flying type moves. But if Charizard terastallized into a Dark type, it would also gain a stab bonus to its Dark type moves. If Charizard terastallized into Fire, one of its original types, its Fire type stab bonus would be increased from 50 to 100%. Terastallizing a Pokémon also changes all of their type matchups. Charizard, who is weak to Water, Rock, and Electric, would remove all these weaknesses if it were to terastallize into Dark and adopt a weakness to Fairy, Fighting, and Bug instead. It would also trade its original resistances and immunities for the resistances and immunities of the Dark type. Now, remember when I said Dark types were Calyrex's biggest weakness? Well, all of that went out the window now that it could terastallize into whatever type it wanted. And this was insane to say the least. Not only could Calyrex completely remove its defensive weakness to Dark, it could also defeat every check one-on-one with Nasty Plot and the right Terra type. A +2 Grass Knot boosted by Terra Grass was enough to knock out Ting-Lu in one hit and the Arceus forms in two. +2 Terra Blast Fighting could remove the Arceus forms in one hit, and with a Life Orb it even one-shot Ting-Lu. Had Yveltal been in the game, it too would have been utterly helpless into Terra Fairy Draining Kiss. Calyrex didn't even need fancy coverage moves either. It could just as easily delete its checks with Terra Ghost boosted Choice Specs Astral Barrage. When Pokémon Home finally released Calyrex into Scarlet and Violet, there were no debates. It lasted one day before being quick-banned into Anything Goes. This was unprecedented. Calyrex was the first Pokémon to be quick-banned from the Ubers tier since Mega Rayquaza in 2014. It was later given a chance to come back through a suspect test, but the result only confirmed what everyone already knew. Over 93% of voters chose to keep it banished. Calyrex's new home was Anything Goes, and even there it stood above everything else, including Zacian, who had been nerfed severely in Gen 9, and Miraidon, the ridiculously strong cover legendary of Pokémon Violet that had been banned from Ubers a year after Calyrex was. The format that had once been created for Mega Rayquaza now had a new centerpiece. Calyrex-Shadow became the most used and most defining Pokémon in the tier, forcing every other Pokémon to revolve around its presence. The comparison became even clearer in National Dex Ubers, a format where Pokémon from every generation coexist under one rule set, regardless of their in-game availability. Here, Calyrex could be judged directly against Mega Rayquaza, who wasn't available in regular Ubers. And once again, the evidence was overwhelming. Just like in Ubers, Calyrex-Shadow was quick-banned on the very first day, while Mega Rayquaza survived for a week. It was undeniable. Calyrex-Shadow was the strongest Pokémon in the history of competitive singles. But what about VGC? Well, competition was far more steep this time around. Calyrex, like every other restricted legendary, was only legal in the Regulation G and Regulation I format, with the former allowing one restricted Pokémon per team and the latter allowing two. And there wasn't exactly a single Pokémon that dominated the others. Regulation G mainly revolved around the hardest hitting legendaries in the game: Calyrex Ice, Miraidon, and indeed Calyrex-Shadow. Since you were only allowed to use one restricted Pokémon, players obviously gravitated more towards the most consistent damage dealers. In Regulation I, however, more supportive legendaries like Zamazenta and Lunala also saw a lot of success. Calyrex-Shadow was, without a doubt, one of the strongest Pokémon in the format. It was especially dangerous in Regulation I alongside Zamazenta. Zamazenta could heavily threaten normal and dark types with stab body press, which allowed Calyrex to spam Astral Barrage a lot more freely. Zamazenta could also protect Calyrex with Wide Guard, which would block Astral Barrage from opposing Calyrex-Shadow. Calyrex-Shadow was, in many ways, the strongest restricted legendary. It had earned more in points than any other restricted Pokémon and also ended up with a total of 79 top 8 placements across all tournaments, which is just one less than the number 1. But curiously enough, Calyrex-Shadow was far less consistent in converting those placements into actual wins. It only won a total of 5 tournaments, trailing behind Miraidon, Calyrex Ice, Koraidon, Lunala, and Zamazenta. In other words, even though it was the most popular restricted Pokémon, it was also the hardest one to use optimally. And this makes sense. Calyrex has to contend with a bunch of hurdles in VGC that are not as present in singles. The most popular Pokémon in VGC history is Incineroar, a dark type. 2 of the most common support moves in VGC are Trick Room, which is extremely detrimental for a speedy Pokémon like Calyrex-Shadow, and Wide Guard, which completely blocks spread moves like Astral Barrage. The immense popularity of Booster Energy Fluttermane, Sucker Punch Xianpao, and Choice Scarf Chi-Yu didn't help matters either. All 3 of them could outspeed Calyrex and knock it out. But if you learned anything about this Pokémon by now, you know that nothing is ever enough to fully contain its power. Again and again, it would demonstrate an unrelenting desire to dominate. Calyrex had already overcome all of its hurdles in singles, and now it was time to prove the same in VGC. And so it would. Despite the many roadblocks, Calyrex-Shadow would still go on to become the most popular restricted Pokémon at the 2025 World Championships. It even made it all the way to the finals in the hands of James Evans, where it lost in a very close set against Giovanni Siski's team featuring Koraidon and Lunala. But even though it fell short of claiming its second World Championship trophy, it had already proven everything it needed to prove. There is no underestimating this beast, no matter how much the odds are stacked against it. And so we arrive at the end of this story. Calyrex-Shadow is without a doubt the strongest Pokémon in existence. Unlike any other Pokémon, it has consistently conquered every format it has ever touched throughout multiple generations. And perhaps that is why it feels so unique. It is not just a product of power creep, but the very culmination of it. The final answer to a question Pokémon has been asking for decades. How far can power be pushed before the game itself begins to fracture? Maybe one day another Pokémon will surpass it. History has taught us never to assume the height of a ceiling. Another generation will come, another mechanic will be introduced, and another legendary will be given a combination of stats, abilities, and moves that players once thought impossible. But even if that day arrives, it won't erase what Calyrex-Shadow represents. It is the true pinnacle of competitive, and there will never be another Pokémon like it.